I'm just getting started, darling.
Disney took a page out of your favorite 2000s rom-com for their newest live-action Cruella. They showed us just who put the Devil in The Devil Wears Prada. There were moments in their newest villain backstory that were too similar not to compare. From Cruella and Andrea being very similar characters to the devilish and eerily identical fashion in both films, you won't ever be able to look at either movie the same way again.
You're going to have to be more specific.
What?
There's nothing like a good morning montage, something both Cruella and The Devil Wears Prada gave to us in their opening minutes. The context of the two scenes couldn't be any more different. Cruella is getting ready for a day of some good old criminal activity, and Andy is preparing for a life-changing job interview. But there are moments that are almost identical. Just look at the two women taking a bite of their bagels or strutting across public transit. It's your classic movie moment. A small-town girl arrives in the big city with all of their hopes and dreams. They stare up at the big buildings all around them and walk into the next stage of their life. Ironically, this moment was filmed the exact same way in both films. Check it out. Little did they know what hardships lay ahead. Dalmatians and Starbucks orders. When Andy lands her job at Runway and Cruella at Liberty, the two are treated like servants. Cruella is forced to work on her hands and knees, literally, and even gets trash thrown at her at one point.
Really?
We couldn't help but compare this to how Andy was also forced to do all the dirty work at first, and while she didn't get trash thrown her way, there were a whole lot of flying jackets. They were also both under the orders of workers who were very bossy.
I really did everything I could think of.
That's all.
Emma Thompson is a huge reason why Cruella was so epic. While she brought the original character of the Baroness to life, we couldn't help but think of Meryl Streep's Miranda Priestley and her wicked ways. Even more similar was how people reacted whenever they arrived at their offices, right down to the script. Just look at how similar these two scenes are. Even the way they step out of their cars is identical.
She's coming. The Baroness. She's out front.
The way work life is portrayed in both these movies is so interchangeable, we probably wouldn't have noticed if they were swapped. The sound of heels clicking, paper shuffling, and people constantly running around to meet the needs of their ungrateful bosses. In other words, chaotic. Another thing to notice is how the camera uses an angle that lets us know Cruella and Andrea are 100% overwhelmed. It wouldn't be a film about the fashion industry without bosses like the Baroness and Miranda terrorizing their designers for just not bringing their A game. At least when it comes to Cruella and The Devil Wears Prada. In Cruella, the Baroness marches past all of her options, similarly to how Miranda asks her designers to come up with all their best ideas on the spot. Don't believe us? Take a look.
I see. You think this has nothing to do with you.
Cruella was sent into panic mode when the Baroness gave her a very specific lunch order. Just like when Andy had to somehow come up with the perfect steak to serve Miranda in just 15 minutes. They both panicked, understandably, but got it done. Just look at them rush through the restaurants. What's even eerier is that both the Baroness and Miranda basically dismiss their perfect meals, as if they weren't more difficult to get than an unpublished Harry Potter manuscript.
We have all the published Harry Potter books. Twins want to know what happens next.
Cruella didn't exactly get a formal interview with the Baroness. It was more of a, you destroyed my shop window, but here's my card anyway type of situation. However, there were plenty of moments where she was interrogated by the Baroness that we couldn't help but find familiar. Don't these scenes remind you of when Andy has her interview with Miranda and Runway? Both superiors are nonchalant and uninterested, but can still see the potential in both young ladies. Granted, one of the bosses was a little more physically violent than the other. Who doesn't love a good Transformation Tuesday? Can we all talk about Cruella's robe going up in flames to reveal her stunning red gown? How very Katniss Everdeen of her. What was even better to see was the reaction of everyone around her. They were speechless. Do you know what it reminded us of? You guessed it, Andy's designer transformation. While she wasn't under disguise, the reactions from her coworkers were basically the same. Shocked. Just look at their faces. Both Cruella and The Devil Wears Prada deal with the corrupt fashion industry. While, yes, Cruella's version is a little more dark and gruesome in comparison to the cattiness of Miranda Priestley's world,
Something funny?
the world both filmmakers create is actually pretty similar, especially when you compare Cruella to Andy's trip to Paris. It's all about competitiveness and wealthy individuals trying to smooch their way to the top. Not to mention that the imagery when it comes to the fashion show is identical, minus the decorations for each decade, of course. Cruella isn't short of high-class parties. The film basically starts and ends with one. Halls filled with ball gowns, fancy hors d'oeuvres, and people who only care about getting ahead. But we have to admit, they're stunning to look at. Miranda Priestley also throws the event of a lifetime in Devil Wears Prada. In both films, these balls are the talk of the town, and for all important purposes, are almost filmed the exact same way. Look at them side by side. There's no denying it. Bye-bye Estella, hello Cruella. While iconic, transformations aren't always a blessing. In fact, for Cruella, it almost cost her the only friends she'd ever had, Horace and Jasper. In Devil Wears Prada, Andy had the same situation happen with her boyfriend after selling her soul to the world of fashion. In both films, the two groups have very similar conversations. Take a listen.
I miss Stella.
What happened? Now you've become one of them.
Now, we're not saying that Meryl Streep walked around the set of The Devil Wears Prada in a Dalmatian patterned coat, but there were moments in Cruella and The Devil Wears Prada where their outfits were too similar and on point to ignore. This is especially true when we take a look at Miranda and the Baroness. Off the shoulder and high shoulders seems to be all the rage for both characters. We also can't forget all the coats worn through the films. There were points where Cruella, as Estella, and the transformed Andy could have swapped closets. We were trying to figure out how it was possible that these two movies were so similar when we found our answer. One of the writers of The Devil Wears Prada actually wrote the first draft of Cruella. Maybe that's the reason why what's being said in these two scenes are so similar.
Everybody wants to be us.
Everyone else is an obstacle.
Not to mention the imagery of the two women toying with their sunglasses and getting out of their vehicles and entering a world of fame and wealth that they've built on false promises.
Everybody wants this.
Overall, the main characters of Cruella and The Devil Wears Prada are just too similar to ignore. Let's take a look at Estella, or Cruella, and Andy. They're both aspiring professionals who take on a role in the fashion industry that leaves them abused by their bosses and co-worker. The difference is, Cruella gave in to her inner hatred, while Andy used it to rise above and pave her own way. Now, onto Miranda and the Baroness. They're both powerful, successful women who don't care who they hurt as long as they stay at the top of the food chain. They also both happen to be running two very large companies tied to the fashion industry. Need we say more?
learning about this stuff and,
This stuff?
Cruella. Similar to The Devil Wears Prada?
Groundbreaking.
While there's no denying the similarities between these two films, we can't discredit how epic this live action was. Giving depth to Cruella made the classic 101 Dalmatians story 101 times more interesting than it already was. Did you notice any other similarities between the two films?